Hello, I'm R.A. Spratt, and I want to welcome people joining us this week on the Yoto podcast platform. Now, just so you know, most of the bedtime stories I tell here are standalone stories. But over the last year, we have been dipping in and out of the epic story of Odysseus, the hero from ancient Greek mythology. And this week, I'm going to be telling the second last installment of that tale. So if you can jump in right here, that'll be fine. I'm sure you'll pick it all up. But if you did want to go back to the beginning and start from the first episode, you can search back through the episodes. The first episode's called Odysseus, as told by Nanny Piggins, and it dropped on January 8th, 2025. Or you can go back and listen to any of the other episodes. You're going to find fairy tales, myths, legends, and mysteries. I hope you enjoy them all. Now let's get into it. Hello and welcome to Bedtime Stories with me, R.A. Spratt. Okay, well, before we get into it, I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who came along to the online book launch for Epically Good Greek Myths. That was a lot of fun. And for all of you who were able to listen to it on the podcast, I hope you enjoyed it. All right, well, that's it. I don't have a lot of news this week. I'm just chugging away at my Romeo and Juliet book and well, I am going to hopefully be going into the studio next week to record an audiobook for the Friday Barnes book that's coming out in June. So that's what's going on here. But let's just get straight into today's story. We've got a few stories coming up. Someone's requested a Canadian one. Someone today just suggested a nice Maori one. And also I want to be pushing on with the Odyssey. But today I wanted to go back to Finn McCool. I've been wanting to do this story for a while. So today we're going to be doing The Legend of the Giant's Causeway as told by Nanny Piggins. Here we go. Derek, Samantha and Michael had just returned home from school. So naturally, Nanny Piggins met them at the door with chocolate milkshakes and donuts. She considered the consumption of these food to be essential first aid that must be immediately applied to the mentally weary to prevent permanent brain injuries. After respectfully giving them time to guzzle as much as possible, Nanny Piggins inquired about their days. "So, did your teachers make you learn things at school again today?" asked Nanny Piggins. "I'm afraid so," said Derek. "They do it every day," said Michael. "But not maths, I hope," said Nanny Piggins. "Oh, there's always maths," said Derek. "They insist on it," said Michael. "Gosh, it seems so inhumanely cruel," said Nanny Piggins. "Mainly because it is, but I suppose we must try and be empathetic towards maths teachers." "Why?" asked Derek. "Because I heard a radio documentary that explained that empathy is what good people do," said Nanny Piggins. "And we always want to be good people, because good people are more likely to be given free chocolate bars. There have been scientific studies proving it." "Fair enough," said Michael. "So we should try and understand your teachers," said Nanny Piggins, "and what makes them do the things they do. They must have suffered horrible trauma in their own early lives to want to inflict maths on poor, innocent children." "Either that, or they're cyborgs sent by an alien civilization to destroy our culture by crushing the will of the younger generation," said Michael. "That explanation makes sense too," agreed Nanny Piggins. "Well, we learned something interesting in our class today," said Samantha. "You did?" said Nanny Piggins. "What a lovely surprise. What subject was it? Have they finally caved to my demands and included cake baking in the curriculum?" "No," said Samantha. "It was in geography." "Geography," said Nanny Piggins. "They didn't try and teach you how to use a compass, did they? It's ridiculous. Everyone knows which way is north. It's where the smell of peppermint comes from, because Santa's house is entirely built out of candy canes." Nanny Piggins always used her nose for navigation. It was much more reliable than GPS or Google Maps. "No, today we learned about the Giant's Causeway in Northern Ireland," said Samantha. "It's amazing. There are 40,000 hexagonal pillars of basalt formed by lava." "They taught you what?" demanded Nanny Piggins. "About how the Giant's Causeway was formed by molten basalt pushing up through the chalk beds and forming a lattice of geometric pillars," said Samantha. "How dare they tell you such an outrageous untruth," said Nanny Piggins. "I didn't know teachers were allowed to tell you a pack of old tommy rot." But all the scientists agree, said Samantha. It was formed 60 million years ago by a sudden volcanic event. Ha! Said Nanny Piggins. Scientists. What would they know? Quite a lot, said Derek. They do keep winning Nobel Prizes and making breakthroughs in physics, chemistry and medicine. Piffle, said Nanny Piggins. They've got the formation of the Giant's Causeway entirely wrong. Anyone in my family could have told them what really happened. It wasn't lava, asked Samantha. No, it was formed by a giant, said Nanny Piggins. The clue was in the name. You'd better tell us the whole story, said Derek. All right, I will, said Nanny Piggins. But first, we'd better make some flies' graveyards. Some what? Asked Michael. Flies' graveyards. They're a delicious Northern Irish delicacy, said Nanny Piggins. Don't worry, they don't contain actual flies. Well, not usually anyway, unless they're so delicious that flies can't resist. Flies' graveyards are stewed currants between two slices of biscuit. The currants just look like dead flies, hence the name. 30 minutes later, Nanny Piggins, Boris and the children were all sitting around the kitchen table eating flies' graveyards, which were much more delicious than the name suggested. So Nanny Piggins was finally able to begin her tale. The Giant's Causeway was in fact built by a distant relative of mine, said Nanny Piggins. Was your relative a volcano? Asked Samantha. This may seem like a strange question, but Nanny Piggins did have so many spectacular and volatile relatives, it was not beyond the bound of belief. No, my relative was a giant, said Nanny Piggins. I didn't know giants were real, said Derek. Oh, yes, said Nanny Piggins. You don't see them anymore because modern nutrition is so poor. It is? Asked Samantha. Indeed, said Nanny Piggins. Back in the olden days when people ate healthy foods like lard, cream and butter every day, they grew much taller. Is that true? Asked Michael. I believe it to be true, said Nanny Piggins, and at the end of the day, that's all that really matters. It's much more fun to believe something spectacular than to know something boring. Besides, you should never let the truth ruin a good story. So can we stop fact-checking my tale and get on with it? Yes, Nanny Piggins, said the children. Now, this giant relative of mine was someone I've told you stories about before, said Nanny Piggins. Her name was Finn McCool. Finn McCool? Exclaimed Michael. You mean the one who accidentally burnt her thumb while cooking the salmon of knowledge, stuck her thumb in her mouth and absorbed all the knowledge of the entire world? Then went on to save the king's palace at Tara by making the fire-breathing fairy Aelin a soothing chocolate milkshake? Asked Samantha. Yes, the very same one, said Nanny Piggins. Well, you never mentioned her being a giant before, said Derek. Well, that's because she wasn't a giant in the previous story, said Nanny Piggins. In fact, there are hundreds of stories about the adventures of Finn McCool, and she isn't a giant in the vast majority of them. But you know what storytellers are like. They like to embellish and get carried away. And when you are a legend like Finn McCool, there are a lot of storytellers telling your stories, and they all add bits to make their versions better. So some people just changed Finn McCool's size to make their stories sound better? Asked Derek. Yes, they supersized her for dramatic effect. I know it seems a little silly, said Nanny Piggins, but in some versions they also say she was a he and a human, so there are a lot of ridiculous variations. Ridiculous, said Boris, shaking his head. But for this story, continued Nanny Piggins, it is a key plot point that Finn was a giant. So you're going to need to adjust your mental image now. Close your eyes and think about how you imagine Finn McCool looked when I told you the last story. Well, she was only 10 years old in the last story about the fire-breathing fairy, Derek reminded her. Oh, yes, said Nanny Piggins. OK, well, imagine her as an adult. A fabulously glamorous adult pig, said Michael. So she sort of looked like you? Exactly, said Nanny Piggins, only 10 times bigger. The children looked at Nanny Piggins and tried to imagine what she would look like 10 times bigger. Nanny Piggins was only 4 foot tall, so this was hard to imagine. I'm struggling to get a mental image, said Michael. Then imagine if Boris had 3 identical quadruplet brothers, and all 4 of them stood on top of each other's heads, said Nanny Piggins. The children looked at Boris. He was a 10-foot-tall Kodiak bear. Then they imagined what it would look like if he had 3 identical brothers. Then they imagined what it would look like if they formed a human ladder standing on top of each other's heads. It would be a bear as big as a 4-story building. "Okay, I think I got it now," said Michael. Now, there were several giants in the olden story days, said Nanny Piggins. There was a giant living in Scotland, and his name was Benandonna. He was huge, and he loved terrifying everyone. But one day, Benandonna heard about the great Irish giant Finn McCool. "Ha!" said Benandonna. "Ireland is where fairies come from, as if they could have a proper giant. I'm sure I could easily crush any giant from over there. If ever I meet Finn McCool, I'll crush her bones into powder with my bare hands." "Well, that's not very nice," said Samantha. "No," agreed Nanny Piggins. "I don't think Benandonna was terribly nice." "I know, let's try and be empathetic about it. Perhaps because Benandonna was a giant, his head was so high above the ground that the oxygen was thinner and he couldn't think sensibly." "Or perhaps he was just a nasty great big bully," suggested Derek. "Yes, that would make sense too," agreed Nanny Piggins. Anyway, Finn McCool soon came to hear about Benandonna's boasts, so she decided to challenge him. "How?" asked Samantha. "Well, Finn had a free afternoon," said Nanny Piggins. "She'd put on an Irish stew and mix up some batter for griddle cakes, so she had dinner all sorted out. And her husband was taking their baby over to the neighbours for a play date, so Finn McCool decided to have some fun." "By taunting a giant?" asked Samantha. "Why not?" said Nanny Piggins. "Well, because the North Atlantic Ocean was in the way," said Derek. "You only say that because you're not a giant with all the world knowledge in your thumb," said Nanny Piggins. "A little thing like an ocean wasn't stopping Finn McCool." She walked down to the coastline and yelled across to Scotland. "Oi, Benandonna!" called Finn McCool. "What's this I hear you've been saying about me?" Now, Benandonna wasn't just huge, he also had huge ears, so he heard Finn McCool clearly, and he yelled back. "I said that I'm much bigger than you, and if ever we meet, I will crush your bones with my bare hands." "Really?" said Finn McCool. "I'd like to see you try, especially because if I see you first, I'm going to crush your bones before you've had time to crush my bones." "Bring it on," said Benandonna. "Come over here and try it." "All right, I will," said Finn McCool. Now, obviously, Finn did not want to swim because she had a lovely new couture dress on from Paris. "Did they have fashion designers in Paris back then?" asked Derek. "The Piggins family did," said Nanny Piggins. "Remind me to tell you the story of my great-great-great-aunt Coco Piggins sometime." "Finn also had beautiful handcrafted shoes from Milan," said Nanny Piggins. "Another distant relative?" asked Michael. "Yes, indeed, my dear great-great-great-cousin Louis Piggins." So, naturally, Finn did not want to wade across to Scotland either. So she decided to build a causeway. "What's a causeway?" asked Michael. "It's sort of like a bridge," explained Nanny Piggins, "except instead of going over the water, it goes straight through the water. You basically build a platform up to the top of the water level." "But how did she do that?" asked Samantha. "Finn McCool simply ripped great columns of rocks off the nearby cliff faces with her bare hands and lined them up perfectly so the tops of the columns looked like stepping stones. All afternoon she kept ripping out stones and building the causeway further and further across the sea, hurling abuse at Benandonna the whole way. And Benandonna was equally keen to fight, so he started doing the same thing. He started ripping up rock off the cliffs in Scotland and building the causeway from his end too. They were both building and hurling abuse and threatening terrible violence, which for a giant is their idea of a lovely day by the seaside. The problem was, as they drew closer and closer to each other, Finn began to see Benandonna more clearly, and she began to realise that Benandonna was in fact much, much, much bigger than her. True, Finn did have all-world knowledge in her thumb, but there's not much a clever thumb can do about 100-foot-tall giant. So Finn decided that the best course of action would be to rapidly move to another location. "You mean she decided to run away?" asked Derek. "Derek Green, how many times must I tell you, heroes never run away," said Nanny Piggins. "They strategically transport themselves to a great distance." "Uh-huh," said Derek. In fact, Finn McCool rapidly transported herself all the way back home, bursting into the kitchen where her husband was heating up the griddle irons ready to make afternoon tea. "Husband, I may have made a small strategic error," confessed Finn. "Oh dear," said her husband. "You know the enormous Scottish giant Benandonna?" "Yes." "Well, he's going to arrive any second now and attempt to crush my bones to powder." "Oh, we can't have that," said Finn's husband, who, even though he'd never been burned by a smart salmon, was still very intelligent. "I know what you should do. Jump into the baby's cradle." "But I'll crush the baby to death," said Finn. "Oh, no," said the husband. "The baby's still having a play date at the neighbour's. Get in the cradle. I've got an idea." So Finn squeezed her giant body into the cradle, and her husband put the baby's bonnet on Finn's head, the baby's rattle in her hand, and wrapped the baby's shawl around her shoulders. And only just in the nick of time, because 1 second later, Benandonna burst in through the front door. "Fee-fi-fo-fum, I smell the owner of a knowledgeable thumb," thundered Benandonna. "Where is Finn McCool? I'm going to crush her bones to powder." "You're looking for Finn?" "Oh, she's out," said the husband, "but she'll be back soon. Why don't you sit down and have a cup of tea while you wait?" "I will," said Benandonna, "because when Finn comes back, I'm going to crush her bones." "Yeah, you said that," said the husband. "You must be stronger than you look then." "I'm the strongest giant in all of Scotland," said Benandonna. "Oh, that explains it," said the husband. "I've heard Scottish giants are unusually small and weak compared to Irish giants." "That's not true," bellowed Benandonna. "I am the strongest, toughest giant in the world." "Oh, if you say so," said the husband. "Finn might be a while. Would you like a snack while you wait? I've just started making griddle cakes for the baby." Benandonna hadn't noticed the baby before. He looked at the cradle and he flinched back in horror. "That baby is enormous," he cried. "Really?" said the husband. "Do you think so? We were worried that she was undersized." Benandonna started to worry. If they thought this enormous baby was small, how big must Finn McCool be? The husband held out a griddle cake to the baby. Now, Benandonna had just built half of a 25-kilometre causeway across a sea by ripping up cliff faces with his bare hands, which was hard work. So Benandonna was a little peckish, and he was a greedy great oaf, so he snatched the griddle cake before the baby could get it. "Mine," declared Benandonna selfishly. But Benandonna had not been paying attention, so he had not noticed when Finn's husband cooked a solid steel griddle iron into the middle of the griddle cake. "The baby can wait," said Benandonna selfishly, with which he tossed the griddle cake into his mouth and bit down. "Ow!" screamed Benandonna, clutching his jaw. "That griddle cake hurt my tooth." "It did," said the husband. "That's odd. The baby never has any trouble eating them." The husband held out another griddle cake to the baby, who we know is really Finn McCool, and the baby munched it up in half a second. "I don't believe it," said Benandonna. "How can a baby's teeth be that strong?" "You think the baby's teeth are strong?" asked the husband. "But they're so tiny." "They can't be," said Benandonna. And he stuck a finger in the baby's mouth to check for himself. This was a big mistake. Finn McCool bit down on Benandonna's finger as hard as he could. "Ow!" screamed Benandonna. "Oh, it's just a little baby nip," said the husband. "My wife has much stronger teeth than that." Finn bit down harder. "Ah!" said Benandonna. "Make it stop!" "Come on now, baby. Let the nice little giant go so you can have your afternoon nap." As soon as Finn let Benandonna's finger go, the giant took off running back across the causeway to Scotland. "Do you want me to send Finn over when she comes home?" the husband called. No, don't do that," said Benandonna. And he started ripping up the causeway behind him so that Finn would never be able to follow. And so that is why there are basalt pillars in Northern Ireland and Western Scotland to this very day, because they are all that is left of the Giant's Causeway that two giants built when they had a very silly argument long, long ago. The end. Time for bed. "Yeah, that definitely doesn't match up with what the geography teacher said today," said Samantha. Then we should make griddle cakes, said Nanny Piggins. Telling stories always makes me hungry. Plus, you can give one to your teacher. I'll bake a griddle iron into the middle to teach him a lesson about how the giant's causeway was really formed. The end. Okay, well, that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed that one. So until next time, goodbye. Hello, it's me again. If you enjoyed listening to Bedtime Stories with R.A. Spratt, it would be really helpful if you could like, subscribe, follow, and or review the show on whatever podcast platform you're listening to now. Every little one of those digital affirmations helps, and the bigger this podcast gets, the more I can justify procrastinating from my real job to keep bringing these stories to you. Thank you.